President-elect of Chile, Gabriel Boric, vowed to support and defend the work of the Constitutional Convention. Studies reveal that the Brazilian Amazon lost more than 10,000 kilometers of rainforest between January and November 2021. Afghans are demanding the release of frozen assets by the international community. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Chile, where President-elect Gabriel Boric held a meeting with the Board of Directors of the Constitutional Convention as part of the government transition process. During the closed-door meeting, the members of the Constitutional Convention assured that they would continue working to materialize the dreams of the Chilean people, enshrining their rights in a new constitution. Meanwhile, the President-elect, who also met with other authorities of the convention later in the day, noted that his administration will support and defend its work. Boric's meetings with representatives of the Constituent Convention came just 2 days after his election as president, indicating the importance awarded to this process, which seeks to do away with the current constitution dating from the Pinochet dictatorship. The Venezuelan government has condemned the ruling of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom to allow, in part, an appeal by opposition figure Juan Guaidó regarding the country's gold reserves stored in the Bank of England. Venezuelan authorities stress that the decision violates the norms of public international law, the Venezuelan constitutional order and British legislation, and at the same time represents serious risks to the international investors that trust in the financial system of the United Kingdom. The Bank of England holds over $1 billion worth of gold belonging to Venezuela, but the reserves have not been returned to the country as the UK government does not recognise President Nicolas Maduro's government. As Venezuelan authorities underline, the ruling reveals the subordination of the court to the UK government, representing a lack of separation of powers, impartiality and independence. In a statement, the Venezuelan Foreign Ministry rejected the decision by the UK Supreme Court, which prevents the country from recovering its international reserves, which would help mitigate the impacts of the illegal United States blockade and sanctions on the Venezuelan population. The ministry stated that it will continue to use all legitimate legal methods to recover the assets held abroad that belong to the Venezuelan people. UNESCO recognized the festive cycle around the devotion and worship of San Juan Bautista in Venezuela as intangible cultural heritage of humanity, sparking celebrations among followers of the tradition. Our correspondent Lionel Bratamal has the story.
As soon as the news came out, the drumming, shouting, crying and thanking was everywhere. They are San Juaneros, devotees of San Juan Bautista, a Catholic saint whose path of popular devotion, including music and rites, has been inscribed as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. The joy and satisfaction burst out after the recognition of a tradition deeply rooted in the Venezuelan people. We learned since we were little where the elderly played. We approach the cultural events at school next to the May Cross. That is the most important thing.
We believe in San Juan, in his teaching. That is why our happiness is so great. We want all Venezuela to know what we do. Our devotion and worship and his recognition is one of more steps to show the world that Venezuela is very big and very cultivated, very rich in its culture, and that we are all brothers and sisters when it comes to these things.
The cult of San Juan Bautista is more than 300 years old, in which the culture and traditions of the Catholic Church and the Afro-descendant traditions are united, a syncretism that has lived with affection and devotion all over Venezuela and in its most remote places. It is about what the people celebrate in the streets, at homes, in the churches. It is not the academic culture, nor the culture of the entertainment, but it comes from the roots of the deepest part of identity.
From the Conucos, the states, the towns, the cities, the coast, the rivers, we have carried this tradition in our hearts, in our souls, and we have developed it with the children in the schools, in the university, in the pedagogical schools. We have to recognize all those roots. That is why we are here, the indigenous people, the Afro-descendants, because without them, we would not be here.
There is much enthusiasm after finishing a research and data compilation work that took 14 years to achieve international recognition. This is the 8th cultural expression that Venezuela has inscribed in UNESCO. It's truly an acknowledgement to our cultures, to our ancestors, and we are convinced that it is a good omen for the following year, where prosperity, food, health, and harmony will abound. San Juan represents that abundance, fertile land, the encounter between people. The celebration route will extend at least until June 24th, the date on which St. John the Baptist Day is commemorated, a popular festivity that, with its drumming, is deeply rooted in the Venezuelan people.
Leonel Retamal y José Rondón, TeleSUR, Caracas, Venezuela.
And UNESCO also listed cultural manifestations from Peru, Panama, Ecuador and Bolivia as intangible cultural heritage of humanity. More details in the following report.
In addition to the Venezuelan inclusion in the list, UNESCO also included the Fiesta Grande of Tarija in Bolivia, a celebration that takes place with a series of religious processions, music festivals, dances, competitions and fireworks in honor of San Roque, as well as the Pasillo dance of Ecuador, which acquires local characteristics influenced by the San Juanito and Yarabí, composed of different meanings among diverse social ethnic groups that has become the national music of excellence. These celebrations were followed by the dances and customs related to the festivity of the Corpus Christi in Panama as an intangible cultural world heritage for its effort to highlight the Eucharistic, which represents the struggle between the forces of good and evil. Furthermore, another Latin American nomination they valued was the use of the Aguajum tongue of the Peruvian people, which represented a very important vehicle of a memory and history known as Aguaruna, the second most numerous and spoken in the Peruvian Amazon, and although it is mainly found in the Department of the Amazons, there are also communities of this ethnicity in Loreto, Cajamarca, and San Martin.
And we'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Studies have revealed that the Brazilian Amazon lost more than 10,000 kilometers of rainforest between January and November 2021. According to a report presented by the Amazonian Institute of Humankind and the Environment, ecological devastation this year equaled 7 times the size of the city of Sao Paulo, representing the highest figure of the past 10 years. The study also states that 54% of the deforestation occurred in areas that were privatized, while the rest took place in farming and conservation areas, with indigenous reservations representing just 2%. The report also revealed that only in November, more than 190 square kilometers of forest were destroyed in the soybean-producing state of Pará. Last week, Brazil's Chamber of Deputies passed a bill that would allow for the recognition of illegal land occupations and deforestation in permanent conservation areas. For environmentalists and opposition parties, this is the most serious setback in environmental legislation imposed by Congress in recent years. We have more details in the following report by Brasil de Fato.
The ruralists in the Chamber of Deputies, with the support of Bolsonaro's government, approved on December 8th, towards the end of the legislative year, a bill that transfers to the municipalities the task of regulating the preservation area on the riverbanks in the cities. Now the measurement of the protected areas will be under the responsibility of the municipal legislative chambers. Environmentalists and opposition parties see a strong reaction to the forestry code. The bill only awaits presidential approval to become law. When we were talking about Ricardo Salaz's herds, they were herds with unlawful rules, which can be changed by a new government. In this case, it is a federal rule that will go into effect. So the damages in relation to them are much more serious from the herd's point of view, from the setback of what we've had so far. In practice, the project will allow further deforestation and occupation of environmental protection areas, in addition to consolidating regular occupations already established. This increases the risks of flood, landslides, and above all, compromises Brazil's water resources, which are increasingly scarce and threatened by climate change.
The vegetation, mostly grasses that make up the riverside forest vegetation, has the function of protecting water resources, of protecting them from damage, for instance, pollution.
Nilton Tato, federal deputy for the Partido dos Trabalhadores of Sao Paulo, recalls that prior to approval, the deputies rejected amendments to the bill made by the Senate that would reduce part of the environmental impacts. Among the amendments, there was a requirement for technical analysis of areas already occupied and the maintenance of current protection footage for areas not yet occupied. We have more and more, especially in medium and large cities, when there is a big storm, the collapse of the hills and the protected areas that are occupied, and those people lose investments and many times lose their lives. We are now watching an example of what is happening with this rainfall in the southern part of Bahia. Every year we see it somewhere in the country. Currently, the Forest Code determines that the strips of rivers in protected areas vary between 30 and 50 meters depending on the width of watercourse. This code began to take shape in the distant year 1965 with the objective of protecting agriculture and cattle raising from their own indiscriminate deforestation. In 1986, a new forest code was enacted with extensions to the permanent protection strips along the riverbanks and streams. In addition to the urgency and inconsistency of the deputies who made the approval of the bill viable, the Partido dos Trabalhadores deputy also considers that private interests are at stake, which will have their way smoothed by the decentralization of decisions.
The Mexican government continues to work to issue humanitarian visas to people who have joined migrant caravans with the intention of reaching the United States. After long and dangerous journeys, thousands of people from Central America attempting to reach the United States have assembled in different parts of Mexico, with many deciding to take up the offer of the authorities to stay in the country on humanitarian grounds and even take advantage of employment opportunities. However, a group that arrived in the capital had protested over the delays in the processing of their paperwork by the Office of the National Institute of Migration. In response, the government ordered all the offices of the institute to attend to at least 30 people a day. In Argentina, the legislator of the province of Chubut unanimously voted to repeal the mega mining law that had sparked widespread condemnation and protests. The law had been approved last Thursday with the support of 14 deputies of the provincial legislature. However, the multiple protests that took place for several days to reject the environmental consequences of the proposal saw legislators repeal the initiative that promoted major mining activity in the departments of TeleSUR and Gastri. Peru's Congress passed a motion of censure against Education Minister Carlos Gallardo, accused of links to extremist organizations and of leaking the questions of the 2021 teacher appointment exam. The minister must now turn in his resignation. The investigation into the alleged leak of the content of the exams had been initiated against Lucinda Vázquez, a legislator for the ruling Free Peru party, and the minister's daughter. With 70 votes in favour, 38 against and 7 abstentions, the motion was approved, representing yet another challenge to the government of President Pedro Castillo. In Cuba, the 8th session of the 9th Legislature of the National Assembly began on Tuesday. Cuban lawmakers are set to discuss an economic report for the current year based on data provided by the Ministries of Foreign Trade and Investment, Domestic Trade and Food Production. They will also study the plan for 2022 and the bill for the state budget for next year. Lawmakers are also set to analyse the bills on the law of military courts, the law of military criminal procedure and the law of territorial and urban planning, land management and a new code of families, all of which stem from the principles enshrined by the new constitution. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Afghans are demanding the release of frozen assets by the international community. Hundreds marched in Kabul on Tuesday to demand the release of billions of dollars of assets frozen by the international community as the country battles a major economic crisis. Battered by decades of war, the economy went into freefall after the Taliban's return to power as the international community washed its hands off the population. Western countries have conditioned the unfreezing of assets on the Taliban respecting human rights, insisting particularly on women being allowed to work and girls to attend school. In a major humanitarian crisis, the United Nations says more than half of Afghanistan's 38 million people face hunger this winter. Banks have also placed severe restrictions on withdrawals by private customers, and many residents of the capital have resorted to selling household possessions to buy food for their families. Emma Cook, the Executive Director of the European Medicines Agency, has expressed concern regarding the new COVID-19 variant.
Let me stress, there's no answer yet on whether we will need an adapted vaccine with a different composition to tackle this or any other emerging variant.
Bolivia received a donation of 1 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine from Argentina this week. This is the largest donation made by Argentina of the vaccine produced in its own labs. Our correspondent Freddy Morales has the details.
This Hercules aircraft carried 1 million vaccines produced in Argentina, a donation from the government of President Alberto Fernandez for the Bolivian people. On behalf of the more than 8,000 vaccinators who are currently performing their duties in the plurinational state of Bolivia, and by having this AstraZeneca vaccine we are using for the booster dose, we are contributing to their task, we are contributing to their work on their behalf and on behalf of the Bolivian people. Along with the vaccines, health experts from the Republic of Argentina arrived in the country as part of bilateral cooperation to face a pandemic of the new coronavirus more effectively. Both countries share 700 kilometers of borderline.
This is the largest donation done in South America. This is the largest donation we're sending from Argentina of all the donations we have ever made. We're reaching 3,270,000 doses of vaccines donated because of this commitment that was stated for the first day in Argentina. Until the moment when all countries and all citizens have access to the vaccine, we will be able to think about turning the pandemic over.
The fact that this aircraft is transporting the vaccines has taken on an extraordinary significance. In the same place, in the same plane, exactly in the same plane, that is arriving today, the government of Mauricio Macri smuggled 70,000 munitions that were used to bring repression, pain and death to the Bolivian people. Today, 2 years later, the government of Alberto Fernandez is sending 1 million AstraZeneca vaccines that will bring health, well-being and life to Bolivia. The democratic government of Bolivia recalled that the cooperation of a right-wing government of Argentina with the de facto government of Janine Áñez, which exercised between 2009 and 2020, had a dramatic impact on this country. For the contraband shipment of 70,000 munitions and other equipment for repression, lawsuits are now being processed in the ordinary justice system against the governments of Argentina and Bolivia from the end of 2019. Half of these materials were found in police warehouses in La Paz, and the origin of the other half, received by the Air Force, is still a mystery. The material they classified as war material to be executed, it was used for state terrorism operations. What for? To crush a popular movement that demanded the breaking of the constitutional order by protesting in the streets, in peaceful demonstrations, and demonstrations of unarmed people. These operations of state terrorism against unarmed people had regrettable results.
Freddy Morales, TeleSUR, Bolivia.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.